Let's understand how SameSite attribute of a cookie works in this video. Let's start with what is a cookie. Cookie is a key value pair that is sent by the server to the browser when user visits a website from that particular server. And it will be sent back to the server by the browser whenever the user visits the same website again. So that is how cookie works at a very high level. Now, the cookies will normally have one or more attributes. These attributes controls when and where these cookies are used. One of those attributes is called SameSite attribute. This SameSite attribute controls when cookies are sent in the cross-domain context. Okay, we'll talk about this in detail a little bit later, but let's first understand what is a site in the context of a cookie. In the context of a cookie, site is nothing but a domain suffix and a name that comes just before the suffix separated by dot. Okay, I know this is a little bit abstract. Let's understand this with an example. So any registrable domain is a site. What is a registrable domain? These are domains like google.com, huggingface.com. These domains are registrable because these are bought from the domain registrar at some point. So we can also go and buy some domains that are available, and those domains are registrable domain. Basically any domain that are bought in the past or you can buy in the future are called registrable domain. These registrable domains are site in the context of a cookie because it satisfies the requirement that we have seen previously for a site. What is the requirement? It needs to have a suffix. In this case we have suffix like com or co. These are top level domains, but still these are suffixes, right? Then we have the name that comes just before the suffix. In the first example we have Google, and in the second example we have Hugging Face. Because we have the suffix and a name that comes just before the suffix, the whole thing is called site. Let's see some other examples now. Let's take different domains. So we have two different domains here. These are basically subdomains of google.com. The first one is www.google.com and the second one is image.google.com. So if we apply the same principle that we have seen previously, where site is a suffix and a name that comes just before the suffix, in this case .com is the suffix and the whole thing is the domain name, but Google is the name that comes just before the suffix. So google.com is actually the site name. So in this example, though we have two different domain names, or basically they are subdomains of google.com, but still they are two different domain names, but the site is same. So although we have two different domains, the site for these two domains are same. Okay, so this is important thing to remember. Now let's see some more examples. We know that github.io is a site where we can host our own pages, right? So let's assume that we have two subdomains, site1 and site2 under github.io. So if these two sites are owned by two different persons or parties, then if github.io is the site, then we have a problem, because if github.io is the site, then cookie between these two sites will be shared because they'll be treated as same site. But we may not want it because these two sites are owned by two different parties and we want to treat these two as two different sites in the context of a cookie. How can we do it? We can't do it, right? Because the suffix in this case is io and the name that comes just before the suffix is GitHub. So github.io is the site for both of these domains. But what we can do is we can override this suffix. We can override the suffix and make the whole github.io as the suffix. When we make the whole github.io as the suffix, then the site becomes site1.github.io for the first domain, and for the second domain the site becomes site2.github.io. How can we override this? Is there any way to override the suffix that we use for this domain? We can actually do it. We can do it using something called public suffix list. So this is a website where we have listed all the public suffixes, and this will be used by the browser when working out the site for any domain. Okay, so we can go and register github.io as one of the suffix in that website. once it is registered, the browser will treat the whole github.io as a suffix rather than just the IO part of that particular domain. So once we have registered github.io as a suffix in the public suffix list, we have two different sites here. Because github.io is the suffix now, site1.github.io is one site and site2.github.io is another site. Okay, because this is the suffix and the site1 and site2 are the name that comes just before the suffix. So these two becomes a site on its own in the context of a cookie. So when the cookie is stored for site 1, it will not be sent to the server when someone visits site 2 because these are two different sites. Okay, now we have understood how site is defined in the context of a cookie. Now let's move on to SameSite attribute now. The SameSite attribute has three different values. They are secure, lax, and none. So I'm going to explain the differences between these values with an example. So let's first take a look at the example that we are going to use. So there are 4 scenarios in these examples. Let's understand these scenarios one by one now. The first one is top level navigation. When a user visits a page directly by typing the URL on the browser, it is called top level navigation. So for example, if the user visits www.amazon.com, directly by typing the URL in the browser, it is called top level navigation. So this is scenario 1 in our example. And the second scenario is same site, different domain. So the user has visited www.amazon.com and within that website, we have a link to an image and that image is coming from image.amazon.com/note.jpg. So if you see this, these two, the top level URL that user has typed and the image link have same site. The site in this case is amazon.com. So these two URL uses the same site, but the domains are different. For the first one, the domain is www.amazon.com. And for the image link, the domain is image.amazon.com. Okay, so the domains are different, but the sites are same. Okay, so this is the second scenario. And the third scenario is we have the same image link, but it is on a different site now. So the top level URL that user has typed in is www.myshop.com. And within that, we have the image coming from image.amazon.com. So the sites are different in this case. The site for the top level URL is myshop.com and the site for the image is amazon.com. So these are two different sites now. Okay, and the fourth and final scenario is we have navigation from another site. So the user has visited www.myshop.com and within that website we have a link, a clickable link that takes user to the www.amazon.com. So this is the fourth scenario, and in this fourth scenario we are going to understand how cookie is sent when user navigates from myshop.com to amazon.com. Okay, so these are the 4 examples we are going to use to understand how these 3 values works for each of these scenarios. Let's start with the secure value. Here the same site value is set to secure. When the same site value is set to secure, when user visits that page directly by typing the URL, which is the top level navigation, any stored cookies will be sent. Okay, and also if it is same site, different domain. So in this case, we have image URL within the amazon.com site and they have the same site. In this case also, we'll send the cookie. Okay, but for different site scenario, we will not send the cookie. And also when user navigates from another site, we won't send the cookie. So this is very important. Even though user navigates to www.amazon.com, the cookie still won't be sent. When user visits this URL directly, the cookie will be sent. But if they are navigating from another page, the cookie will not be sent. So this is very important. This is how it works when the value is set to secure. Okay. Now let's see how it works for lax. Lax is very similar to secure. The value will be sent on the top level navigation and the value will be sent on same site, different domain, but the value will not be sent if it is different site. And finally, this is the important difference. When a user is navigating from another site to this site, the cookie will be sent. So this is the main difference between secure and lax. So lax is little bit more relaxed in the sense that even when the user is navigating from another site to this site, the cookie stored for this site will be sent. Okay. And the final one is none. So this is where we don't have any restrictions on sending the cookie. So the cookie will be sent in all 4 of these scenarios. Okay. None is not recommended for any scenarios. Normally we'll either choose secure or lax. Lax is more common nowadays. In terms of the default values, in the past, none used to be the default value. But it is not the case anymore. The default value on modern browsers now are lax. Okay. And it is always recommended to set the SameSite value explicitly. We don't want to fall it back to default because in some old browsers it might be none, and which might lead to some inconsistent behavior. And for this reason, it is always recommended to set the SameSite value explicitly. Okay, so that is all I wanted to cover in this video. I hope this is useful. Thank you.